All right. As folks are filing it in here, it looks like we're going to have a good one, guys. Lots of people showing up very early. As you file in here, if you are expecting to be here for AI office hours with Endsight, you, my friends, are in the right place. We've got a very a full agenda for us today. Where we're at right now is just kind of going through the welcomes and introductions. So a little housekeeping to get started, though. If you could just really quickly maybe open up the chat and say hi, hello, to make sure that you can hear my voice, make sure all the audios are working and everything, and that you can see the screen. If you want to make it fun, hello, there we go. We see some. If you want to make it even more fun, drop in what the temperature is wherever it is that you're logging in from. I'm not going to drop it in, but it is a balmy 91 degrees in Northeast Ohio right now. It is humid, it is hot, and I am happy to be in the air conditioning. So thank you everybody for for making sure that you can hear us. Um, we are going to spend some time with Brian Torado, who I'll introduce to you in a moment. He's going to give us a 90-day overview of what's happened in AI the last 90 days. And Josh Carroll, our president, is going to join us to share a tool he's been building in Claude Cowork called the Executive Information System. And Josh wanted to make sure I was very clear about this. He did not name this system. Claude did, right? Right, Josh?
That's
You'd
true.
have named it something entirely different, like Tralfaz or Alpha or something like that. Okay, once Josh shares what he's got, what he has to share with you today, we'll stop really quickly for some recap and just share some resources with you. And we are going to leave as much time as we can today at the end for Q&A, so that you have an opportunity to talk to these guys and get answers to your questions. The team then. So my name is Jason Claus. I'm the director of marketing here at Endsight, and my sole purpose for being here is just to be the masters of ceremony. I love the sound of my own voice, so they let me do that. So thank you, you two. Our expert panel today, though, is Brian Torado, our director of AI automation. He runs he and his team are responsible for the projects internally and what we're doing with our clients in the AI world. And Josh Carroll is one of the founders and the president of Endsight. And we're thrilled to have both you guys. So thanks for carving out time.
Yeah, thanks
Welcome.
for having
This
us.
is where you say hi, just in case you need your cue.
Right on.
All right. All right. Um, we've been talking about this with clients and internally a little bit, and I want to share it with you as sort of just a calibration of for today. We feel like there's always been a gap between what technology can do and how our teams use it. That's always been like I think the Microsoft Office suite is a great example of that. People typically only use about 10 to 15% of the features in that tool set. But with the introduction of ChatGPT, we feel like that gap is really widening at a very high rate of speed, and it's turning it into more of a chasm than a gap, and it's leading to sort of two competing stories that are being told in the community right now. That one of them, we're calling it the threat narrative. It's probably the more popular one right now because it's fear based, that AI is coming for our jobs, that we need to do more with less. The strategy needs to be about getting smaller and charging less. But we actually think that that's not the real story. We think the real story is more towards what we're calling the opportunity narrative. And it's that AI is actually going to build capacity. And as it builds capacity, teams are going to be able to do a lot more. They're going to solve problems they weren't able to get to in the meantime, or address opportunities that they didn't have the capacity to address. And that those companies that start acting now are going to get stronger. They're going to grow and they're going to thrive. And there's a path that we believe to get there. And that path it follows something that we've been talking about a lot. We call it crawl, walk, run. And crawl would be learning and experimenting with AI, building a foundation, getting good at prompting, maybe getting what you need in place to select that commercial grade LLM. Walking is where you switch from prompting to actually asking and getting the LLMs to do some work for you. And running is when you're able to scale that across the organization in a safe and consistent way. All beyond the scope, most of it for what we're going to be doing. I mean, we've got some examples. I think we would, Josh's example would best be typified as a walk example today. And maybe Josh will give it some more color there when he gets to it. What we hope you're going to gain from today is some visibility into what's been happening. And it's a lot. Brian's got a lot of content to share with us today. we're going to see AI applied to real executive work, and then of course leaving some time for you for question and answers, and to ask questions that you might not have been in a room to ask lately. So with that, Brian, let's bring you in here. What's been going on? I mean, short version is a lot, right?
Yeah, short version is a lot. Excited that you all are here. Excited to talk about the last 90 days. As Jason mentioned, there's a lot that's happened, and it's been exciting and an exciting time for AI. So what we're seeing is AI moving into your apps. And what does this mean? This means that we're seeing less and less, although still valuable, of the back and forth chatbots that we've traditionally been used to, and more about AI taking multiple steps for your work. So this is the agentic side of AI. We're seeing four major vendors out there currently. So Anthropic, Microsoft, OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, and Google, who does Gemini. And with every one of those vendors, they've leveled up their flagship models this last quarter. So with Anthropic Claude, we saw Opus 4.8. With ChatGPT, we saw GPT 5.5. Google, we saw Gemini. And the really interesting thing here is we saw our first new class of model announced as well. So we'll get into that a little bit in the timeline, but that new class of model was called Mythos, which is just an interesting shift and change and increase in capability. We're also seeing that vendors have realized that having so many different interfaces that you work within is confusing for us. So we're seeing ChatGPT and Microsoft, for instance, taking a page out of Anthropic's playbook, where Anthropic did a really good job to make it more user-friendly, where we have chat, we have the Cowork, which is the agentic side, all in a single app. So we're starting to see that come out now. And the promise from OpenAI is they're going to merge also their interfaces into a single kind of super app as well. And so these two leaders out there really, they're both one-upping each other over and over and over again. And you'll see that in our timeline. So where Anthropic started as a business first and enterprise first company, ChatGPT and OpenAI started as more of a consumer slash business company. And what we've seen in the last quarter, or a little bit more than the last quarter, is OpenAI and ChatGPT leaning more towards the business side. So even though they had that big hefty base of consumer, they're leaning more into the business side. What we're seeing with our customers across the board and also just out there in the industry is a preference for Anthropic Claude. And so in our customer base, we're seeing new projects at about a 10-to-1 leaning towards Anthropic Claude. So folks are realizing that that might be the platform that they want to be on, and they're voting with their dollars on the adoption side.
Right. Before we move on really quickly, we're going to pop up a survey. We're curious to see how folks on this call are aligning with what we're seeing. So that should be popping up momentarily, and just be interested to see what other folks are also seeing. So we'll move on to the next slide and bring
And
that back.
sounds good. And by the way, I'll say if you happen to be in ChatGPT and not Claude, both are excellent platforms. So both are very, very capable and have very comparable feature sets. So don't feel like you're getting left behind and you need to make a pivot. Just what we're seeing is more of the leaning towards the Anthropic Claude side. So what happened in April? Well, we had Claude announcing this new class of model called Mythos. And so they didn't actually release this. They just announced it and they gave it to a few select partners. And the reason why they didn't release it is it had this capability that far exceeded where current models are. So they wanted to be careful. They wanted to be safe. And more about that in a couple of slides. And it's interesting here in June, kind of how this is all panning out now. So they also released Opus, kind of their frontier model. That was another jump in capability. OpenAI, not to be left out, released their Images 2.0 model, which is a super capable images model. It allows for really great infographics. It allows for editing of photos as well, more precisely. So you can think of OpenAI, ChatGPT, image generation, and Google Nano Banana image generation as the two that are kind of leading that space for image generation. And then we saw at the end of the month, OpenAI released their 5.5 model. And so this brought their capability back up to where Anthropic was with their 4.7 release. And so at the beginning of May, we saw some other interesting components happening. So companies started shipping industry suites. So Anthropic was the first to do this. And they shipped Claude for financial services, Claude for legal, and Claude for small business. And we see other vendors doing similar things, and we have a little bit more on that later on. We also saw that OpenAI continued to roll out other types of models. So their voice model, they released the new version of that, which is just another jump in capability for the back and forth voice, for live translation, et cetera. Google, not to be left out, brought additional kind of intelligence towards that agentic side of its platform. So that's with Spark, it's with Gemini, it's with Gemma, et cetera. And then towards the end of the month, Anthropic said, "Hey, OpenAI, you can't be in the lead," and they dropped their Opus 4.8 release, which is another jump in intelligence, which is just kind of amazing for all of us.
So it seems like we can probably expect to see this continual back and forth, right? Between
Well,
those two players.
we'll see. I have a little bit more on the next slide about
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Okay. This one I couldn't leave out because I thought this was kind of a neat story. So Google rents compute from a rocket company. So Google, that is Google buying compute from SpaceX. And by the way, Anthropic did the same thing in the previous month. So Google itself is a hyperscaler, and this is how constrained compute is. Google actually went in with SpaceX to purchase a good chunk of their compute in their large cluster. So interesting times for sure. What we got when we remember 2 slides ago, we talked about Mythos, that new class of model. We got to play around with that. So we got Fable 5, which is Mythos with some guardrails around it. And it was incredible. And we got into it, and it was very amazingly capable at all kinds of tasks. And then a couple of days later, the government suspended access. So they asked Anthropic to pull it down for all users a couple of days after launch. And the reason, there's many reasons why. The most popular reason that was cited was bypassing guardrails that they had in place for that model. So we expect it to come back at some point, but this is the first time where we've seen the government step in and say, hold on, this thing is too capable. Let's bring it back for a moment. And that's an interesting story that I think is going to pan out over the next 90 days.
Yeah.
We
I would imagine, yeah, Stephen Hicks is probably going to have want to share a little bit about his perspective on that in his next office hours too. So a little plug there for that.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be great. And so we saw also new additional open source models. So these are free models that are under MIT licenses, but free models doesn't mean you can run it on your MacBook Pro. These still require hefty compute. But we saw the first free model in GLM 5.2 that's somewhat comparable to the leaders in the frontier here, OpenAI and Anthropic, at least in that core set of space that they work in. So that was interesting. We have more information about this kind of changing idea of how we purchase compute, how pricing is going to change in the future, and kind of what we're seeing. That's this Cowork story, Copilot Cowork. So this is inside of Microsoft. We're seeing some interesting indications there. And then finally, OpenAI went to go release their 5.6 release, which is that Mythos class of their model, the new class of model. And the government said, hold on just for a minute. This is very capable. Let's do more of a staged rollout and a limited preview to make sure that things don't get away from us. So this was as of like a couple of days ago. So what I think we're going to see in the next quarter is maybe not the same speed of model release, and we might see some gating that happens
Mm.
for protection as well.
Oh, I'm behind here. Wrong button. There we go. Now I'm on it. Sorry.
Okay, so these built for industry plugins are kind of amazing. They're starting points. They're really starting points. And so Anthropic released Claude for legal, financial services, and small business. And so a couple of examples, these are plugins that include skills. And so the skills and connectors as well. And so the skills might be doing contract review or redlining, for example, in legal, or connectors to Westlaw or iManage. Financial services has their own set of items that are going to be skills associated with them. And on the small business side, we have plugins into common platforms that small businesses use. So PayPal, HubSpot, Canva, and we have skills built in to do some of the workflow associated with those as well. We're also seeing that Microsoft and OpenAI are embedding these as well in their platform. So one of the most recent things was the word plugin for legal. So I believe that's still in Frontier. So that release. So we're seeing Microsoft putting out items also specific for an industry, and then OpenAI is releasing these packs as well. So this is where we talk about, gosh, the future is a little bit hard to predict right now because everything's moving really fast and vendors are also changing their pricing model. So this is an example, a story. So Cowork inside of Copilot, Microsoft, when they first announced it, and by the way, like there's so many things called Cowork and Copilot, and it makes it super confusing, but this is the
It does.
Microsoft Cowork in Copilot. When they announced it, they said $99 in addition to your regular Copilot license. And then they kind of pedaled it back, and then they decided to just include it with your regular 365 Copilot license in preview. And so it was free. It was no additional cost there. And then once it went out of preview into GA, they changed the model on us again. And they said, you know what? We're not going to do the $99 a month per user. Instead, we're going to do consumption based. And what I think this tells us is we're going to see more and more of this consumption-based pricing in the future. And the best way to protect yourself where you can is going to be to select annual plans where you can lock that pricing in, at least for the foreseeable future. So this quarter too, another thing highlight is the enablement gap. And so what do I mean by the enablement gap? We have a large majority of people using AI tools. We have folks that need to understand how to leverage these tools. So you have the tool, and then you start to have this gap between the tool and what's possible. And we're also seeing that engaging in training, whether it's self-paced training, whether it's train one to many, really provides that leverage that you need in order to get the most out of the tool. So you can see kind of tool alone, it grows, but it grows at a lower rate. But tool with training, you're going to get way more out of it. So you're going to have a basic rollout. Then you might do role training, or you might do specific group training. You might do guided training or small sessions or work on workflows together as well. And that will help bridge that gap between just tool and what can be done with the tool. And in that, you're going to have folks, some of you have probably heard me say this, folks that are leaning into the technology. You're going to have folks that are leaning away from the technology, and you're going to have a middle group of people that are happy to use the technology, but they just need to know how. And so this enablement gap, this training helps to bring everyone up, and then you get the most out of the tool possible. And then they inspire each other, right? Which is exciting. It's this flywheel. It's building a fire. Something else that became much more mature this last 90 days are skills. So as we talked about some of those industry-specific plugins, and by the way, those plugins, they're free. They're already included in your subscription. So the Claude for legal, Claude for financial services, Claude for small business. Those are all included if you have a subscription to Claude. Skills are what is a piece of what comprises those plugins. So why do skills matter? They're kind of the leverage layer, and they're portable. So Anthropic open sourced these skills. So all of the vendors are using them in the same way now, or mostly the same way. So that means you can take a skill from one platform and you can bring it to another platform. And what is this skill? This is your iterative back and forth with the large language model. You might start with an idea and go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And all of a sudden you have pages and pages of detail that are important and massaging to get your result that you want. You can use the skills. It's very meta, but there is a skill to build skills. You can use that skill in order to build your skill based on that chat. And then you have that for the future. And instead of having that big iterative back and forth, you just invoke that skill and it takes care of what you've done in the past. And then those skills are shareable with other folks as well. So good examples of those: newsletter generation, scopes of work, proposal drafts, getting those in a consistent format, brand guidance. SOPs are really useful to have a standard operating procedure that's the same, but with the detail that you need in there over and over again. Branded slides, signatures for companies, building a signature that's adherent to your standard, that's consistent across every person for their Outlook, for their email is a great use. And also personal writing. So I want Claude to talk like me. I don't want it to talk like Josh or Jason or like it wants to do by default. So you can build your own personal style skill as well.
All right. Kind of hard to not give it to give an update and not talk about privacy and safety. So
Yeah, I have to talk about
Stephen
this.
will be happy.
Stephen will be happy. And this is not something that's new or changed in the last 90 days, but it's just so important. And so you really have two branches in privacy and in these products. You have the consumer side and you have the business side. And they really do truly have different privacy policies associated with them. And so if you're using this for business, you definitely want to be in a business plan. This is going to have training turned off, for example. That's a common question we get. How do we prevent our data from being trained on? And it's going to have more strict and adherent privacy policies that you would expect from a business platform. I left a couple of links below if anybody's curious about reading deeper, but you definitely want to be in the business side. At home, consumer is fine, right? But at the business, you want to be on the business side so your IP stays safe.
It's really good.
I think,
Well, Brian, this has been an awful lot of information to share. And so, everybody, if you've got, we've got a handful of questions. David, thank you for entering the ones that you did. We're going to make sure we get those asked in Q&A. Josh, we're going to bring you in here to share your executive information system in just a second. But I want to make sure we pop that survey, and we had 81% participation on the survey. So thank you, everybody. And it's not quite as well aligned as I thought it would be. 40% of the respondents are using Claude, 21% ChatGPT, 18% Copilot, 2 Gemini, 1% Grok, and then 1% other. I'm really interested what the other might be. But those were that's what we got. There's a share results button that I'm hesitant to press, so I'm not going to do it because I haven't tested it. So, Josh, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can take control of the machine. And I guess the best place to start is like you. I guess with there was the thing that drove you to lean into this is probably the best place, isn't it? Like what was the beginning of this?
Sure. Well, so we had just as enterprise or Endsight as an organization about a year ago decided to lean heavily into the ChatGPT via OpenAI, and we got enterprise ChatGPT licenses for every employee at Endsight. And so had been a very heavy ChatGPT user, moving from chat, kind of like Brian was talking about, into agentic workflows, and had been using things like Codex to create agentic workflows for some of my common tasks, like reviewing monthly financials, for example, things like that, and teaching it how I do it so it can shorten the time. And as I got to hearing more and more about some of the things that Claude was doing, it kind of piqued my interest when they released Cowork to general availability, which was kind of around the April timeframe. It had been out in beta, early access earlier on, but really hit mainstream in April. And so around the May timeframe, I hit Brian Torado up for a license and just said, "Hey, I know we're testing Claude. We kind of keep our toes in the water and all in as many different LLMs as we can, but I'd like to get my hands on Claude and start to play." And so really this came out of me playing in Cowork and starting to understand what it's capable of, right? So I'll start by sharing my screen and I'll walk you through the beginnings of a console that I developed, which is kind of the overall output here. And then we'll go into what's going on essentially behind the scenes. So pardon me while I grab this for just a moment and share. So, and rearrange my screens here. Okay, so we should be taking a look at the console. Um, so, so essentially, as Jason mentioned, this EIS name essentially came from Claude, as I was working with it, trying to get it to teach me how to use it, if I'm honest about it. And what it's, well, I'll kind of dive into what I do here, and then I'll go into what it's capturing in the background. But it started off by capturing things like followed meetings, the meetings that I couldn't attend, and gathering that information. And then I started to capture more and more, and eventually ended up with what I say is not a completely baked system, but there's a lot to it now. And so the way I start my day now is I launched this application that Claude helped me write with Claude Code, right? So I was working in Cowork to architect the system, and then got to the point where I wanted a slightly more sophisticated viewer so that I could see everything that was going on in the background in a more pleasing way. And admittedly, I'm no UI expert, so there's a lot to be done, on the user experience side here. But this was kind of a breakdown of what is otherwise some kind of ugly markdown files in the background in the way that Claude is storing the data. So I start my day here, and every day at 4:30 in the morning, Claude reads my calendar, right? It looks at everything that I've got scheduled for the day, and then it prepares a meeting preparation brief for every single meeting I have that day, right? And so then I've taught it the context of what are the different types of meetings that I have. So if I have a one-on-one with a direct report, what does that meeting look like? What's the standard look for it? If I have a one-on-one or a skip level meeting with someone that maybe reports to a direct report, what does that look like? If I have a what's referred to as a level 10 meeting, right? A meeting that where we're working on our strategic goals, what's that look like? And so it understands the context of all these different things, and then is pulling information that it's gathered over time about what does it know about the individual I'm meeting with or the company that I'm meeting with, if it's a vendor or a prospective customer or an existing customer. And what does it know about the commitments that I've either committed to for that person or maybe that they've committed to for me, so that it can put together a preparation brief. And so if I just go ahead and launch one, I'll go in to Jordan Keller. By the way, I should mention that this is capturing highly sensitive information. And so what we're looking at right now is a sanitized version of data where it's actually replaced names, and it sanitized some information. So for demonstration purposes, because it would be difficult to show you the actual data. However, this is exactly what it looks like to me. And so when I come into my meeting preparation brief for Jordan Keller, it knows who Jordan is, right? And it's opening up with a little bit of information about what I should do here. So it's saying, hey, you should recognize Jordan for closing this opportunity with Cypress Ridge, right? It was a new renewal opportunity where they expanded the scope of services. And then further on, it's saying, hey, Jordan draws energy from being recognized for wins, right? And so you should name it specifically before you launch into what's going on. And so you might go, well, why? Like, how does it even know that? Well, as I get into the system a little bit more, I'll show you background, but I've actually fed it information about each of our personalities. So we use PI for the personality profiling or personality index tool. And so it knows my personality type and it knows Jordan's personality type. So it knows that I'm of the type that I'm going to go straight to problems. I don't want to dwell on the wins. I want to live in the place where we have problems that we need to solve because it's never good enough, right? And it knows that my natural personality type isn't going to be great for Jordan, right? Jordan's not going to feel successful because I'm not going to recognize wins enough. And so it's actually cueing me based on what it knows about the two of us to pay attention to those wins, which has been quite helpful to me, right? So then it's going to grab themes, things that we should discuss. This is all gathered from the information that it has access to, transcripts from various meetings, et cetera, giving me coaching opportunities. So what should I do better? So for example, if I've gone 3 weeks without having referenced a win for Jordan, it's gonna let me know, right? It's gonna keep track of the amount of time that maybe I've strayed from that. And so this is kind of where I start my day. I'm looking at these meeting preparation briefs just to understand what I have going on in that particular day. So now if I dive into the background a little bit, I'll jump over to Claude, right? And so this is Claude Desktop, and the tab that I've got access here or that I'm sitting on is the Cowork component of it. So you can see that in the top left corner. And that sits in between chat and code, right? And so I've got access to all three of these tools within the Claude Desktop. In chat, kind of like Brian was referring to earlier, is a little bit more of a basic, question and answer. It's the prompting thing that we were all kind of used to, at least up until this past April. Code is more powerful. That's where we might develop full-blown applications and full-blown agentic workflows and things like that. But it's a little more technical, honestly. And so it still uses the large language model, so you can code in Claude Code using just plain words, but there's a lot going on in the background. And so what's kind of neat is that Cowork kind of sits in between those two, right? So it's got essentially the same chat interface, but it's plugged into everything. So I've got this native connector into Microsoft 365. And so just out of the box, when I enable that connector, I can see all of my email, all of my Teams messages. I can see everything that we have in SharePoint and OneDrive, just as an example. I can enable third-party plugins like for HubSpot CRM, as an example, or QuickBooks Online. So all kinds of places that I can enable out of the box to get a view into the world, just for context. But really, Cowork is all about getting work done. So as opposed to just asking questions and getting novel answers, or maybe prompting for work on a one-off basis, this is about getting work done on a repeated basis, right? And so inside of Cowork, then I've got all these projects, and I've filtered by EIS, which is how I've named them, my executive intelligence system. But this started with just a test where I wanted to learn how to use the system and how to schedule recurring tasks. And so I created this followed meetings capture and brief project. And so essentially what it was doing is it was looking at my calendar every day. It was finding meetings that I didn't attend, but rather followed, and then pulling out information for me. And so it kind of looked like, I'm going to jump back for a second into the tool. It looked like this. And so I have my weekly followed meetings. I can jump in here and it would give me an idea of what was I missing. And so, for example, cross-meeting themes that I should probably pay attention to, things that people are talking about in a bunch of different meetings that I'm not in. What decisions are waiting on me? In other words, places where people are stuck and they're unable to move forward because they need an approval or something like that. What are the wins, right? Keying in on my personality. Claude actually suggested maybe we track wins. I thought it was a good idea. We don't need to track problems. I'm already on that, but naturally, but it can help me track wins. And so maybe there's somebody that I should recognize or be aware of, right? And then on recurring series, it's spelling them out individually. So for the Response Center daily stand-up, how are we tracking on adherence to our standard work? And what's the overall sentiment there? Like, are folks energized but in kind of really working hard to resolve issues, or is it starting to feel strained? Maybe they're kind of getting on their heels. And in those cases, I know then where should I go or pay attention to? And so followed meetings was helping me with things like that. So then if I jump into from there, right, what happened with the evolution of this is on that was the point where I went, this is actually really cool. I'm getting a lot of value out of these meeting summaries. And so I went into Claude and said, hey, what would happen if you had access to everything? Like, so let's just imagine where I started to capture the meetings I actually attend, and you were able to track things like my commitments that I make to others or what they make to me, right? And then what if we could automatically close them as you see via email or Teams direct messaging that we wrap those things up? right? So then that led to things like the communications capture, pulling out all of my sent messages and received messages, all of the direct messages I send in Teams and whatnot. Then it led me to, man, it'd be great if you had a little more context. So what if I started to feed in information like those personality profiles that we talked about? But then that led to other things, right? So that led to things like, well, I want you to know the strategy of Endsight. So if I feed it our one-page plan, what are our core values, right? That was actually important. We're a very values-centric organization. I want the system to know that. What's our purpose, our big, hairy, audacious goal? What are our competitive advantages? And then this is a little sanitized down here, but eventually, what are our 3 to 5 year priorities, our 1 year priorities, and our 90-day priorities? And who owns them, right? And so with all this additional context, it starts to understand what's happening across the organization and how we're making progress. So that when I come into, say, a level 10 meeting and we're here to talk about the annual rocks, I can look at it and go, well, how are we sitting? Well, I can see that for this one, we're 90% complete, right? It's green. But this guy over here, the Kaizen with a lean management system or backed by a lean management system, we're 60% complete. So it's probably something I should be paying attention to at this point in the game. So all of that additional context starts to feed the system, right? And it gets more and more powerful with time, which is interesting. So, so out of that, then I started to create synthesis projects. So those were the meeting prep briefs and things like that we talked about. But also in there is a surface where I can ask just random ad hoc questions. Hey, I've got a board meeting coming up. And what are some of the topics that I should address with the board, right? And it starts to understand because I've fed it, for example, our organizational chart, right? Where everybody sits inside of the organization. It understands what kinds of conversations the board needs to have versus what kind of conversations I might have with the frontline employee working in the response center, right? And so it starts to filter and guide me in that way. Another thing that I noticed is that because this thing is running on scheduled entries in the background, that it worked great if I was home and my machine was on all the time and those captures would kick off at 4:30 in the morning. But if I was traveling for some reason and my laptop wasn't on, when I booted it up at say 8 in the morning, all of those things would try to run at the same time and they would collide with each other. And that led me then to building a capture orchestrator, right? So that rather than having individual tasks running, it would capture what was going on in more of an organized way. And that's where we see things over here, like these are scheduled tasks within Cowork. So you can see where originally all these things that are paused down here in the bottom into the right column, those were original tasks that were running that started colliding with each other as they were trying to write to the same sets of documents. So I created the capture chain, right, which is an overall parent project, right, that takes a look at everything and understand what's going on. And then lastly, there's a bit here, I'll jump back over to this project because there's a lot of tuning that's required. And so in here, this is a commitments area inside of my dashboard. So these are all of the things that I've committed to or that somebody else has committed to me, right? And I've taught it now to categorize on 2 axes, right? Because originally it was capturing these things, but there was no differentiation between something unimportant and something very strategic and urgent, right? And so now when it comes in, it understands or it categorizes how strategically important is this and how time sensitive is it? And based on that, it lands all my action items into 4 quadrants. And so I know this quadrant 1, these are strategic and urgent. Quadrant 2 is strategic, but not urgent. And then quadrant 3, not strategic, but time sensitive. Maybe I should delegate those things. And quadrant 4, not strategic and not urgent, probably things to just ignore or maybe batch if I've got a bunch of spare time, right? But in here now, I built a tuning surface where I can come in and say, well, actually, I closed this. So I might say, we talked about this in the last one-on-one. This is actually a closed item, right? And then I can prepare the entry and then go ahead and confirm and queue it. And when I do that, then that goes into essentially a staging queue where the system learns and it gets better and better and better each time. And that's where, if I jump back now to Claude, and we have this EIS monthly improvement cycle. So I baked this in where it runs every single month at a minimum. What's really happening right now is I run it about every week manually because there's so much to develop and improve on. But it pulls from the feedback I've given it, right? About how was this meeting preparation brief? How was this task? How was this strategic tracker? And did it understand the full context? And so it absorbs all of that and it comes back to me with recommendations about improvements that we can make to the system, right? And then at the same time, it reconsiders the entire architecture. So as we get all this additional context about ways we might improve the system, if we were to redesign this thing entirely today, what would it look like? Right. And so it understands the background of how this thing is entirely, how it's built, and it's using the most current model or the most powerful model at the time to rethink the entire process. So it's always self-improving. So that's a bit of a window. So window into my world. So stop there because I could probably go on for days. There's a ton of stuff to talk about and a ton I didn't actually get to. So
You got a ton of questions, so we probably should make sure that we get into those, and I think you'll appreciate. I think you're going to appreciate a lot of them.
cool. Yeah.
They're Josh type questions. So let's get us back into the. Let's see. Let's get us back here. Hopefully, folks are seeing my screen now. Yeah. Um, Uh, that was really good. This is going to be fun. So I want to bring it, but really quickly before we get into the Q&A section, I want to bring us back to the gap, right? I think, and it sounds like folks are kind of coming along with this notion, right? That there's always been a gap between our technology and what it can do and how people use it. AI is turning in that gap into a much bigger gap. We're calling it a chasm here. And companies that are working to close it, they're going to grow. They're going to hire. They're going to outrun folks that take a wait and see approach. And if that's you, no matter where you are on your path, I want to make sure that we're here to come alongside you. There's lots of different doors onto this path that we see. And so maybe you're not even ready to talk to anybody yet. Maybe you just want to do a self-assessment or something like that. Try to get more information as you try to wrap your arms around what this is and how you can apply it to your business. We have an assessment that we can make available to you. We would love to do that. Maybe you're ready to talk right now to somebody. David, this is for you. I saw your request. Brian and his team would very much like to talk to you when you're next week if you're ready. And so Aaron actually probably has already sent you an email to see if to try to get that set up for you. We're happy to have a no agenda conversation with anybody that wants to do that right now because we're all learning. Maybe you're ready for some sort of a structured approach. You want to implement an LLM and you need some training. We have packages like that we can talk to you about. Maybe you're beyond that, you're building, and for you, it's about acceleration. And you just need access to other builders that can help you accelerate or maybe help you to stave off some pitfalls that we've seen that maybe you haven't yet. We want to make ourselves available for that. Or it could possibly be that we haven't even thought about what it is that you need yet, but you've got something that some spark from today. We want to hear about that too. So we're popping up a survey right now. If you'd like to talk, by all means, just let us know and we'll make sure to follow up with you. In addition to the content that we create for AI, we do an awful lot. We do quarterly webinars. So our next AI office hours is going to be September 10th. We hope that if you found this useful, please join us again, Brian, and probably not Josh. I don't know, Josh. Maybe we'll get you to come back. Maybe we'll be able to. Maybe you'll have another version for us to share. But we'll be back on the 10th. On July 23rd, you don't want to miss Stephen Hicks's cybersecurity office hours. That very few people get that kind of access to that kind of a security operator. Stephen's brilliant. He'll be sharing what he has seen the last 90 days and what he's doing on Endsight's behalf and on behalf of our clients to help keep them safe. And then on August 11th will be end user cybersecurity training. If your team needs a refresher or needs training or has a regulatory requirement for training, the regulatory requirement thing might need some conversation, but this is high quality training that is certified for MCLE credit from the California Bar Association. So it is of a level that that cuts that mustard. All right. With that, let's get into some of these questions, and I'm going to start with the folks that entered Q&A questions. So, first question we got is it likely that Brian? I think this is a good one for you, and I'm interested in what your thoughts are too. Is it likely that AI on-premise AI is going to become more prevalent due to token costs going forward? And do you have any guidance on deploying such models to customers? You were just talking about this as we were like right before we went live.
Yeah. What I think we continue to see is distillation of larger models into smaller models. Um, and so sometime in the future, I do think that on our mobile phones, as you're starting to see with some of the models or other places, we'll start to see these smaller models that won't have the horsepower, won't have the intelligence that these larger models have. When you're thinking about like a local model that's capable, something like a GLM, which would be capable and similar to like a Claude, Opus, or a GPT 5.5, you're still looking at quite a large investment in both the hardware, the compute associated to run that model, and then the ongoing maintenance. Just one of the big differentiators is when we purchase from OpenAI or from Anthropic, they're taking care of all of that harness for us. So we get Cowork, we get connectors, we get plugins, we get skills. When you're bringing your own model in-house, you're building a large majority of those components as well at the same time. So there's an initial cost and an ongoing cost that tends to be decently high at this point.
Okay. The next question I've got, this Josh, this one's for you. It came up while we were showing bringing in PI information, and Carol asked, I'll just read it: garbage in, garbage out at an interpersonal level? Question mark. Yikes. But I think that underlying the question is the quality of the information that your system's pulling from, and maybe you could just talk about that a little bit and maybe validate what Carol's saying, because I think she's right.
So I do agree, right? And the more information that you feed, you run the risk of essentially flooding the system with a bunch of unimportant data, right? And so you would have to ask yourself the question of, well, is personality profile data actually valuable to you or not, right? And I'd say the reality is I've done this long enough now, right? So I've been like I've got enough gray hair that I know how to interact with people. It doesn't mean I always do it the best. And so I'd say, PI data might be novel. Is it critical? No. But I do find it helpful because I wasn't kidding about my personality type is one where I don't actually like recognition. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And so the net result is I tend not to give it. And so to have it actually track how I'm behaving, right? Because that is something I aspire to do better, to make sure that I'm recognizing people for doing a good job. And so the system can actually help me. That's a case where it might be kind of specific to me. That's really helpful. But maybe to your point about other things, garbage in, garbage out, it's like, does it really need to know everything that's going on inside the organization? Maybe not. Um, I do think there's an ideal state where like the more the AI knows and understands, the better it can guide you, but it has to understand how to categorize that stuff, right? And that's why I started training it on what's actually strategic and what's not. And the reason is the first time I had it prepare a meeting preparation brief when I had a meeting with our board chairman, is it gave me a bunch of very tactical things about hires that he doesn't care about, right? And so I had to say, hey, you know what? Let's talk about context for a minute. So take a look at the org chart, and I want you to understand that a person at his level wants to talk about things like this, right? Whereas when I'm working with maybe a frontline employee, I'm working more on standard work. It's a different style of conversation and coaching, right? So let's take that into context. And so with that additional context, it can start to categorize what's important at what level, right? Because it's like some like data might be very important to our support desk, but isn't necessarily relevant to our board chair unless it's a theme, right? Or a particular problem that we're stuck on. And so I do feel strongly that you're going to benefit from having it aware of as much information as possible, but it also needs the context of that data. Otherwise, it becomes a sea of noise.
It's really good. This one's a little bit out of order, but I think a lot of people are probably wondering this. When you put information in, it looks like you talked to the system.
Oh,
You want to, and I think you did.
I
You want to
did,
share how
yeah.
you did that? Yeah.
I did, yeah. So a while back, I was introduced to a tool called WhisperFlow, and basically what drove it actually is I have an iPhone, and the iPhone Siri drives me crazy because for whatever reason Siri just can't transcribe anymore. It used to be great, and now it just kind of sucks, and I find it super frustrating. And so WhisperFlow is just a much better transcription tool, and so I'm able to hold down just the Windows and Control key at the same time on my keyboard, and just speak naturally, and it transcribes it for me. WhisperFlow also has the functionality of converting something into a prompt for what it's worth. And so if I transcribe something, I can just put it in the way that I spoke it, which is what I did there. But if I'm preparing a prompt, I can actually hit what is it, Alt or Windows Alt 2, and it will actually
Yeah.
turn my spoken word into a tuned prompt specifically for AI. So it's kind of got it's novel. It's not necessary, but I'll tell you what, I hate typing now because I'm so used to just speaking. And I'm not the best typer. I never really learned how to do it properly. So I'm a little on the slower side, not terrible, but I can speak so much faster than I can type. So it's kind of changed
Uh,
the game for me in that way.
I love that. Brian, I know you use it too. Do beyond those two, are there any other features that you use in it?
Not beyond those two. I will say common words that Siri gets wrong, for instance, in WhisperFlow, you're able to do translations from those words, like Endsight, for example. It always wants to do it with an I instead of an E. And so you can go in and tell it, no, I actually mean Insight with an E, and then it will get that correct in the future. So that's another feature that feels pretty powerful for me. And then similar to Josh, I mean, just how quickly you can verbalize something versus typing is kind of a huge unlock as well.
Yeah, really helpful piece of technology. And we'll get it. We'll make sure that we include a link to WhisperFlow so you guys can take a look at it. I use it too, and it's invaluable. Let's get back into some of the. David asked a question that I think a lot of people at this point, particularly when you think about the different models. So Brian, how should one think about like which AI provider is best from a business perspective? You just have so many different options, and they're leapfrogging, which also introduces a whole bunch of FOMO.
Mhm.
Maybe just share a little bit of guidance on how you think about that, how you've been thinking about it for Endsight, and how you're guiding our clients.
Yeah, so I would say it's difficult because there's exciting new features being released all the time. Somebody once told me when we landed on a platform is land on a platform, invest in that platform, and as long as that platform is keeping up with what's current, great. Because you're going to see something shiny somewhere else all the time. So how do I select? How do we select? I think looking where the industry is going, we're looking at what's being selected and looking at where people are voting with their dollars is particularly helpful in that. And realizing that some of the skills, regardless of whatever language model you end up on, will be transferable to other language models. So it might not be a forever thing, but you'll want to commit for a period of time to get the most out of it. So for us, Josh had mentioned we just moved over to Claude from OpenAI or ChatGPT. And again, I'll say either platform are they're both amazing.
It's really good. Josh, I know we've talked quite a bit about this, but another great question. We mentioned I think I said it. You mentioned using the AI safely. What does that mean? That's the question. But I really am hoping you'll share a little bit about just the the nature of how security is done in this world is changing. maybe if you could speak to that just a little bit, and Stephen will talk to it a great deal later, but I think for now, you have a unique frame on it.
Yeah, I'll talk to it a bit in this context, and I know when that question popped in the chat, it might have been also in response to what Brian was talking about with respect to like Fable and Mythos and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be a bit more there, but I'll start. So in this case, right, if we're moving towards this ideal that I mentioned, where the AI is just aware of everything, right, then there's just a ton of potentially sensitive information that can't really be categorized in the traditional way. And so if I just look at a transcript as an example, right, there's probably a lot in there that could be publicly available, some that might maybe should be available within the organization, but not outside. And then maybe some that's really just unique to a person or a pair of folks that are having a conversation. And so traditional models for security, like if I just go back to say NTFS, the file system security structure of permissions, is just a little too antiquated. So I think we need to think about tagging data a little bit differently than we did in the past. And there are some models that kind of support it, but I think if we're honest about it, the security world is not really keeping up with the pace of AI right now. And so we're not seeing the best models for it. What I thought was interesting is that I was building this project and I was architecting it with Claude, asking it for feedback. It actually raised a flag and said, hey, this information that you're capturing is highly sensitive. And I would suggest that we build a tagging system so that you prevent exfiltration of sensitive data, right? And it came up as I was starting to think about things like I didn't talk about this yet, but I taught it how to write email in my voice, right? And and so if I write an email in my voice and it's referencing this repository of data that has sensitive information in it, then there's this deep risk that I could accidentally send something out that's confidential if I'm not paying attention, right? And by the way, you should always pay attention because the AI is not quite ready to just do your job for you, but it can help you kind of speed up your tasks a bit. And, and so what Claude ended up doing with me is it created a tagging system. So every bit of information as it goes into these dossiers that sit behind the scene, this series of markdown files that hold all this information for people and vendors and companies, et cetera. It tags every bit of data of, is this Josh only data? Is this company only data? Is this publicly available information? What is this? So that if I ever ask it to do something that's counter to that sensitivity tag, then it'll raise a flag and say, hey, you've got some sensitive information in here. Are you sure you want to send this out? Maybe we should redact, this component of information, which is super helpful. And I actually used that functionality when I prepared for the demonstration today, right? Said, hey, let's make sure that what we're showing is not sensitive. So it changed things for me so that I could have a demo surface. So Brian, I don't know if you want to speak to security on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it pretty well. It's this cat and mouse game that is being played between security and the kind of leading AI front. And it's going to just be interesting how that plays out over time. So I talked about one of the reasons why why Fable was taken down was some bypassing of some guardrails. So the bypassing of guardrails in itself doesn't mean that like data is exposed. What it means is that you can ask that model to do things that there was guardrails around it to prevent. For instance, like go look at this software, help me find vulnerabilities for this software. It's not the same as saying, tell me everything, pull out all of the detail that my company has ever put into this cloud model, for instance. So there's different layers of security and different components, and it's all moving really fast together. And we're going to keep seeing this cat and mouse game that happens with these models and security doing their best. And Anthropic, or not Anthropic, OpenAI recently announced tools specific for cyber threat hunters. So the good guys on the cybersecurity side that they're going to make available to continue to stay ahead of the bad guys working in this space too.
Really good. All right, I think we got time for one last one. Austin asked, when a new model releases, do you have a particular go-to set of queries you like to use to test the improved capabilities of the new model compared to the older models? And that sounds like that sounds like you and Austin might be kindred, Torado.
Well, I'll say there were some default fun ones for a while, like how many R's are in strawberry. There was the the car wash one, like the car wash is 100 feet away. I want to get my car washed. Should I drive or should I walk? And it would say, well, it's only 100 feet away. Why don't you walk? But of course you can't get your car washed. Then I would say those are the fun, weird ones. I would say find a decently complex prompt that you're comfortable with or a skill that you use. Maybe you've created a skill for yourself, and that would be good to test against these new models as they come out because you're used to the result of whatever that skill is. And then you can see how that changes with the model as the model changes under the hood and the intelligence changes because it's not just an intelligence change, it's that whole neural network. So you can get different unexpected results that just mean that you need to go back and modify that prompt or that skill that you're using.
It's really good. Well, it is what time is it? 5:01. So we're over just by a little bit. We didn't get to all the questions, everybody, and despite our best efforts, Josh, you ended pretty close to on time. So we use the proper end here. We are going to go through these. We will follow back around with the folks that ask these questions specifically. We'll also publish these on the recording page. We are going to put up a recording of this. Everybody that would like to talk to us, we are going to reach out to you to schedule some time to talk to you. Everybody that raise their hand for other resources or to sign up for things, we'll make sure to do that. These content webinars that we do, they're most successful when people are involved. I would just want to say thank you to everybody for all your involvement. And we hope you found this useful and that you'll come back because this is new and we're all learning together and it's kind of an exciting time. Josh and Brian, you these things just don't happen. It takes a lot of work to put these together. I want to thank you for your for the care and the efforts and the expertise that you put in today. So thank you. And then behind the scenes, a lot of you probably know Aaron Krebs. He's just kind of the guy that makes these things happen. And we're really grateful to you, Aaron. Thank you for all your hard work with all of our webinars. And with that, everybody have a good one. We will be in touch, and we hope to see you again soon. Hopefully at Stephen Hicks's office hours in July. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.